Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're so excited that so many of you could join us tonight for On Astrology for Real Relationships. I'm Alex Elliott, the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. Before I bring out Kirah and Jessica, it's my pleasure to introduce them both, and then we'll get right into the conversation. Kirah Tabourn is an astrologer, educator, and creator passionate about intersectionality and accessibility within the astrology community. She produced an astrology and culture magazine called Influx that centered and celebrated POC and queer folks in spirituality, art, and activism. She has recently become the director of Fresh Voices in Astrology and also organizes regular meetups for astrologers locally and around the world. Her first book, Zodiac Signs, Pisces, was released in February 2020. You can learn more about her on her website, thestrology.com, and her social media at thestrology. Jessica Lanyadoo is a Bay Area-based astrologer with over 20 years consulting experience. She is author of Astrology for Real Relationships, Understanding You, Me, and How We All Get Along, and the weekly host of the popular astrology and advice show, Ghost of a Podcast. You can read her horoscopes and follow her on social media for more of her down-to-earth wisdom at lovelanyadoo.com. And now it's my absolute pleasure to turn it over to Kirah and Jessica.
Hi.
Hey.
Yay, hi.
Took me a second.
This is awesome. Thanks for doing this with me.
Of course. I mean, duh. Why? How could I say no?
How could you say no? That's right. That's right.
How are you?
I'm okay. Yeah. I'm okay. I feel really excited about your hair, and I feel really excited to hang out with you.
Me too.
Yeah.
I feel like we kind of have a little bit of like a twinning thing going on with the patterns and the hair.
Honestly, I take that as a very deep compliment. So thank you, and I will take it. Yes.
Well, I am so excited to talk to you about your book and about astrology, because we're obviously both, I feel like anyone who's calls themselves an astrologer is pretty like astrology obsessed. I mean, that's maybe I'm speaking for too many astrologers, but it's hard not to be. And when your book came out, I guess I was going to say earlier this year, but it was really like on New Year's Eve, right?
It was on New Year's Eve. That's right. What a weird day in a weird year. Everything's weird. But yeah, it was New Year's Eve on 2019.
Yes, this beautiful book that
you have it.
Yes, I pre-ordered. It came
Thank
right
you.
on time. And yeah, I was excited about it because it's a relationship book. It's an astrology book that's about relationships. That's not super, for one, like heteronormative, for two, just about like love and sex. Like your book goes way beyond that. And so I wanted to ask you, like, what led you to like even get to this point where you wanted to write a book like this?
Well, okay. First of all, just thank you for pre-ordering and for saying nice things and for looking cute with the book. So I, as a queer person, as a person I've been reading astrology books since I started studying astrology formally in like 91, 92. That's 1991, 92. Right. There it is. The year you were born. She's old. So I started, and what I used to do, and I still have a lot of my original books, is I would take a pen, and every time they would refer to a person as he, which was literally 100% of the time, I'd write an S in front of each he. And I just like, that was the only way I could learn, because I was just like, this isn't speaking to me at all. And I wanted to learn astrology. And so I kind of got to a place in my career where I felt like I was like competent enough to write a book, because I have kind of high standards for that sort of thing for myself. And so when I had the opportunity to actually write a book, I was like, well, I'm for sure going to make sure it's queer. And more than queer as in like gay versus straight, I mean queer as in questioning everything, queer as in finding like using astrology as a tool for finding our agency within our birth charts and within our planetary alignment for people who don't have their whole birth chart. And I wanted to make sure that this book embraced and kind of held up friendship, because I don't know if there are other astrology books about friendship, but friendship's a huge part of life. I think it's really like an old school way of being, to center like, I'm single and I hang out with my friends until I get a partner. And then when I get a partner, I drop my friends because they're not important. The thing that's important is my partner. I guess I say fuck that. And I also say the astrology of friendship is very much about our platonic loves in our community, but it's also the foundation of our relationships with our partner. Because if you're not best friends with your partner, you're eventually going to be bored by fucking them anyway. So you have nothing to fall back on, unless of course you're trapped. So I wanted to create a tool that would access all those things. And then I'll just add one last thing, which is the astrology of being in a long-term relationship versus dating someone and not being sure what's going to happen, or not being sure what you want to have happen. It's different astrology. And I think a misuse of astrology is that people think about like, what kind of a partner is an Aries? But if you're on your third date, that's none of your damn business. You need to figure out what kind of a person that Aries is for you and how compatible you are. So I think there's like my hope with the center section, which is about dating and hanging out, was to kind of like expand how people think about these things, and to give them some astrology to do that with. So a long answer, but yeah.
I love it. Yeah, and to kind of like talk about just the way the book is structured, it's structured into these 3 different parts. And the first part is like, what is it? Friends and chosen family. So yeah, it's about more than even just these platonic friendships. It's going into chosen family, which I think can also just extend to like your family too, like especially, you know, there are some lucky people out there who like their families are their best friends and cousins.
Very lucky people. But yes.
Yeah.
And then there's so many people who have fucked up relationships with their family of origin. And so their friends in their community become their family. Like, I feel like now part of the astrology world is my family, sometimes distant family, but they're in that section of the book for sure. Yes.
I love that. Yeah. And then it goes into hanging out and dating, which is like progressing to another level. And then it goes into the long-term relationships. And then in each one of those sections, you talk about every single planet, like in that context, and you go into all the different placements, like in each of those sections, which is just like, I don't know if there's any other book out there like that goes to such a detailed level. Yeah, what was it like writing that?
It was a real struggle coming up with the structure, because you're right, there isn't other books like that. I am not okay, so I write sun sign horoscopes. I'm not poo-pooing upon them, / also, it's not my favorite form of astrology. And so, you know, inevitably when I first started telling people, oh, I have a book, they'd be like, okay, I'm a Gemini, let me go to the Gemini section. I'd be like, good luck with that. Like, the problem with that is it's too simplistic. And if we're going to use astrology to help us individuate and actualize and have healthy lives, my attitude is we have to actually be willing to get into the nuance of things. And the way that I deal with astrology, let me see if I have a good, it's not great, but I'm going to do it anyways, because there's a bit of a visual platform here. The way I use astrology is, and no one should be surprised because I'm a fucking Capricorn, is very much about the repetition of fundamentals. I'm all about the repetition of fundamentals and going deeper and deeper and deeper with them. And so, you know, you can look at a pen like this, and then you can look at a pen like this. For the audio, I'm turning the damn pen. And then you can look at it this way. So it's different angles on the same thing. And when we do that, it's like this cascade of knowledge kind of starts to grow and expand. And that is a huge part of how I work with astrology. And it's actually a really accessible way of working with astrology, because so many, I mean, you know, it's like there's an infinite amount of things to learn. There's an infinite amount of like, I don't know, ways to run the math and to like, you know, look at, I mean, we could even talk, you know, we've talked about house systems just between the two of us and stuff. Like, there's just so many things a person can do. And it's not possible to get so wrapped up in the math in the way I use astrology and not lose track a little bit of the human that we're looking at. I think, I'm sure it's possible. I just don't find it. It's not something I've seen a lot. So for me, my interest with kind of creating this structure was to, first of all, validate and support these kinds of relationships, but also to support people and being able to actually use astrology. Like, I'm all about, like, let's take it out of the inaccessibility of just like scholarliness, because I'm super duper not a scholar, and just go into utility. Again, I know I'm sounding like a poster child of Capricorn, which I am, but yeah, so that's kind of my attitude. And it took a long time. I worked with a writer named T. Greenaway, and we labored. We like lost hair, we lost sleep. It took so much effort to come up with a structure that would actually work for the reader. And hopefully we did it. And the way the process of writing the book went was this big mouth talked the book and she typed it, and then we edited it together. So I have a very low tolerance for writing, even though I write all the time. So this was, for me, the best possible way to write a book.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. I mean, I have a Mercury talisman on right now because I'm also someone who writes all the time, and like, it's so painstaking.
Yes.
It's so difficult.
It's awful. When people tell me they like it, I'm always like, what's going on over there? It's so writing is hard. Yeah, writing's really hard. Yeah.
It's funny, you kind of just like went into another question that I had for you, which is like, you know, you're a triple Capricorn. I was going to ask like your sun, moon, and rising, but I think most people know that you're a triple Cap. I'm a Scorpio. I have my Scorpio necklace on with an Aries moon and a Pisces rising, if anyone was wondering. But I wanted to ask you about how like being a triple Capricorn went into creating the structure for this book, and also I guess like how you see, I don't know, when I think of Capricorn, I think of someone that feels a lot of responsibility and takes on a lot of responsibility in life. And so I'm just wondering how you see that Capricornness coming out in the book and the way that it was written and structured.
Yeah. You know, I take astrology really seriously. I mean, I don't especially necessarily take myself super seriously, but I do take astrology really seriously. And I'm at an age, and I've been doing it for an amount of years, that I've just seen like trends. I've lived through trends with it. And so, you know, my aesthetic is pretty pink and bright, obvious. But my content is, I'd like it to be really, you know, accurate and useful. And so for me, the thing that is very, very Capricorn about this book is a lot of things. One is just the fact that it's like a reflection of a couple decades of practice, which, you know, for anyone taking notes, that's a Capricorn statement right there. And I never wanted to write a book. Like, I super never wanted to write a book. I just, at a certain point, I feel this sense of responsibility, not in like an obligation negative way, but I feel like honored that I have worked with such a diverse demographic of people over the course of so many years. And I've had the opportunity to work with people ongoing for so many years that it's just given me this like kind of perspective with astrology that I want to share. Like, I really want to share with people. And because it's a relationship book, being able to kind of encompass a lot of different parts of human identities that come up around relationship is a huge part of my practice. It's a huge part of my viewfinder. And I wanted it to be a part of the book as much as possible. And, you know, like in that center section, I'm moving away from Capricorn, but I'll come right back. That center section of like hanging out and dating, that was the hardest section because I actually wanted it to be about fucking a lot more, about sex a lot more. But I realized I kind of like put too much into that section. And there's just so many ways of being a sexual being or being ace or anything in between. And these things kind of like ebb and flow over the course of life. So that was actually the hardest one because I'm such a literalist. I wanted it to all be in the section, but it just was its own book, so I couldn't. But the other thing I think is just I want something that people can turn to in multiple moods and in multiple relationships. You know, again, it's just like Capricorn way of like, I want the utility to be on, damn, going. And yeah, I can't really separate anything I do from Capricornness, I guess, except for my aesthetic, Aquarius. But yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I remember you saying when listening to, it's so funny, I'm having this memory now. Last time I was in California before I moved here, I was listening to the astrology podcast episode that you were on. Wow. Okay. This is all coming full circle. And I remember you mentioning that about like wanting to talk more about sex, and then that being like its own book. And I'm just like, okay, but can we have that book?
Can we do that book right now? I know I'm really, really, really excited about writing that book, but it's really like, it's to do it responsibly is going to take it being the only thing I'm working on for a minute. Cause this is the thing is like, I mean, I don't mean to blow anyone's mind when I say, straight men have written a lot about sex. They feel really competent and confident to be like, this is sex and astrology. And I have never been satisfied. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Never been satisfied. So my attitude is like, I want to write something that does, you know, really encompass what I've seen in my practice, which is, you know, probably the smallest demographic of people I've worked with is straight guys. Although I certainly work with enough straight guys, not enough in a negative way, just like I work with straight guys. But I definitely want to create something that kind of gets into the nuance of the felt experience, because the thing about sex is that there's a lot of reasons why people have it. And it's not always primarily around pleasure or like, I enjoy this in any way, right? Just like people get married for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with love or compatibility, you know? And this is where like sun sign astrology really like it falls flat for us. And where, you know, when people turn to astrology with this, like, tell me what's going to happen. Tell me, should I date a Scorpio or this? It doesn't work like that, because what is your ambition and why? What's your motivation and why? And this is where my obsession with the outer planets really emerges, because from my perspective, the outer planets, in particular Saturn, which is, some people say not an outer planet, I kind of hold it as one, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, to me, and the way I use astrology, they articulate ancestral and inherited issues. They articulate mental, spiritual, and emotional and physical health issues. And the things that come from our generation, which means that they are kind of related to blind spots, like they fall out of our viewfinder because so many people resonate with us. It seems like the only truth. And from where I'm sitting, those things can often dominate the choices we make or the way we don't make choices, and we let life or people choose us. And so the kind of the way that I work with astrology and sex, it is really nuanced. And it's like, how does anyone like write a book or create like a static document that effectively kind of synthesizes the uniqueness of a human person with like varying fluid needs? Yeah. Like it drives me nuts. This is the problem with books, right? I mean, books are great. I learn from books. I encourage people to read books, but astrology is about the synthesis, right? It's about like the wind hitting the sail. The prettiest sailboat in the world is just an object until it's on the water and the wind hits the sail. And that's what astrology to me. It's really about the synthesis of our parts and how that, like the synthesis of our math plus our free will and our soul, come together to fuck shit up or make good choices or whatever it is. Like that's like really, it's hard to fully give that to people in a book, you know? It's so maybe that's the Capricorn answer too.
That works.
Yeah, that does.
So, you know, aside from writing this book, horoscopes, I read you're like one of the only people whose horoscopes I actually read.
Thank you.
It comes conveniently in the middle of the week, and when I'm scrolling through my emails, and I'm like, let me see what Jessica has to say about Pisces. Yeah, I read my rising sign. But yeah. So besides that, you obviously have Ghost of a Podcast, which, you know, I think probably my favorite podcast music at the end. I like turn it up just to hear that end.
That makes me so happy.
I like always wish that it lasts longer because I really, really love it. And it was a big inspiration in picking my podcast music. So
which I cannot wait to hear. Didn't it just, your podcast just launched in this past week, didn't it?
Yeah, last Saturday.
What's the name of it? Just so everybody knows and they can rush and listen.
It's called The Astrology Show.
The Astrology Show.
That's 2 episodes. So yeah, check it out.
But I can't wait.
Anyway, about your podcast.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, it comes off as very evident that you love doing the podcast. You love making the podcast.
Yeah.
And we love hearing it. So I just wanted to ask, like, you know, especially because I just got into podcasting, what is it about it that is so impactful? Like, why do you love it so much?
I love it so much. I want to marry it. Like, I don't even need to be open or non-monogamous. I just want to fucking marry it. Old school, make it my wife. I will pay for everything kind of thing. You know what I mean? I love podcasting. And it shocks me because one of my dearest friends for years was like, you need a radio show before podcasts. And then he was like, you should get a podcast. And I was like, you don't know me. No. And then I started doing self-service podcasts with Jericho Mandiber for Girl Boss. And it was like a 7-minute segment. And I was like, oh, this is like, I'm like penguin wingsing over here, but I feel like I'm a condor and I've got this massive wingspan. Let a bitch go. And then when the show got canceled or ended or whatever it was, I took, within 7 days, I was like, I guess I'm going to just make my own podcast. And so I just like did it without a whole lot of planning or forethought, which is like, for me, the best way to do things like that. Cause if I overthink it, I'll just never do it. And I called it Ghost of a Podcast, honestly, because I was like, it's not a real podcast. It's a ghost of a podcast. It's a wisp of a podcast. I almost called it Wisp of a Podcast, but I thought Ghost of a Podcast would be better because I was like, I don't even know if I want it to be about astrology. Maybe it'll be more about my mediumship work. But I very quickly figured out that it was this thing I'd always been waiting for, because the limitations of writing that we've talked about don't exist. I can just fucking say what I want to say, and I can get into the nuance, and I'm less precious with what I say when I'm verbally saying it, because the word just flew by, you know, I mean, now I'm transcribing them, so it sounds stupid, but it allows me to do what I really love, which is reading people's charts. And it allows me to not only give, you know, my whole career, I've worked full-time, like since the end of 1999, full-time as a consulting astrologer. So I've met with clients for a living, and I love doing that. It's my favorite thing, honestly. But what I've learned through the podcast is, instead of doing one-on-one, I can do one-on-one and one-on-many at the same time. And so I can help a huge amount of people at once, while still actually serving an individual. And at the same time, it like does this like triple duty of allowing me to teach how I do astrology, which is, I don't love teaching. I don't know if I'm very good at it, because I'm like, go study that, learn that, come back, we'll focus on this. Like, I'm just not a great detailed teacher that way. But I love being able to just like model how to do things. And I don't know, people tell me I'm good at teaching things. I don't really know that I am, but whatever, I digress. But the upshot of what I'm trying to say is that it allows me to teach and model in the way that I enjoy. And this is going to sound cheesy and stupid, but I feel the connection with people. Like it's, you know, in addition to being an astrologer, I'm also a psychic and a medium. And I just want to say, for anyone listening, being an astrologer is not equal to being a psychic. Don't show your astrologer friends your palms. They can't read your auras necessarily.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It is so annoying that people don't know the difference. Also, I get it, but I'm an annoying person because I actually am psychic and a medium, and I read tarot, and I'm an astrologer, but that these things are distinctly different and took different study and are different skills. So guys, figure it out. Okay. So for me, as a psychic person, I energetically like to tap into really the best in people and in the people that I'm connected to through the podcast. And and it's just like, it's like a practice that I feel really passionate about. And I feel really passionate about in incredibly trying times that if we don't kind of step up to the transformation that we all as individuals and as a collective need to embody, you know, it's going to get on top of us. I mean, it's already on top of us, but it's, I mean, you know, astrologer to astrologer, it's not about to get better, and it's not going to go away on its own. So, you know, I will also say, which is not exactly what you asked, but watch me damn go. A big part of why I started the podcast and like what actually finally pushed me to do it was this astrology, you know, of this year of 2020 and of what's coming next. Because I really am of the conviction that emotional intelligence is the foundational thing that we need as activists, as concerned citizens, as like healthy people healing from trauma, you know, all of it. I really think that emotional intelligence is key, and astrology can be used as a way around emotional intelligence because it's so analytic. And I like to use it to go straight into it as much as possible. So my hope with the show was to create a resource to connect the social, the political, the personal, and connect it all through the amazing tool called astrology that we are obsessed with. Yeah. So yeah, so I super fucking love it. I just love it. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, it's super evident, and I think you do such a great job of blending all those things together in your show. And, you know, just to put it out there, the mediumship episodes that you have done, including the ones that were like in person, you know, at events, and then also with the animals, those are some of my absolute favorites, and I cry every single one, every single mediumship one. So yeah, I mean, I know you can't do events these days, but, or at least not in person, but if you ever do more of those, I mean,
no one's asked me a mediumship question in a long time, I don't think. Well, actually, maybe a couple comes through. Write it in. You know, the event that I did, it was in San Francisco, and it was at the San Francisco Spiritualist Church. And it was such a wild experience because I'd never done anything like that before. And it was, yeah, there's just dead people everywhere. I gotta say that with COVID, there's just dead people everywhere, and there's so many people in mourning, and then people who have grief latent, you know, from other losses unrelated to COVID, unrelated to this period. It's triggering them. This is just for mediums, for people who are energetically sensitive. The kind of psychic toll of this period is dramatic, just in that one context. And, you know, I think that the thing about mediumship is that it is really, I think it can be really inspiring for people. I think it can also be confusing for people because it's kind of like, this is going to sound weird, but watch me go. It's kind of like sex positivity. People are like, well, if I'm sex positive, then I should like everything sexual. And people think, well, if mediums exist, then I should be able to talk to my dead loved one. And it is not that simple or that straightforward. And, you know, I always get nervous with the medium stuff because I don't want to contradict somebody's religious convictions. And my experience as a medium of dead people and what happens after we die kind of fucks up the whole heaven and hell thing. Like it really, honestly, there's no heaven and hell from my perspective. You know, maybe I'll die and be like, shit, I got that one wrong. But I mean, from all the dead people I've talked to, it really doesn't seem that way. So, but I do worry about that, you know, because I don't want to offend people, but I mean, yeah. So.
Yeah. No, I don't even, that didn't even cross my mind because to me, it's always been so like true. Like that's the truth. And so that's very, yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, speaking of this time period, 2020, and all of the fear and the overwhelm, and, you know, everyone's feeling it in their bodies and seeing it, you know, in their personal lives and on the news, everything. And it's a lot. How do you have advice for anyone out here listening about how we can use our astrology, even just like if we only know some basic things, like how can we use astrology to help us move through this time?
you know, I think the first step is don't look for the answer. The answer is a mistake. Instead, look for authenticity and healthiness in the moment and on the path. It's about using astrology, especially if you're like a student in early years and you're not like super independent with your use of astrology, or you're just kind of like an astrology fan and not really like a heavy student. You can learn about, like, as I talk about horoscopes on my podcast, I break down the transits of a day or of a week, and I talk about them in how they're related to the patterns of what we're going through. And in using astrology that way, just as something as simple as like taking notes and sticking it in your planner, it can allow you to have a little more grace when somebody at work is an asshole to you. And you can be like, oh, it's that shitty transit. That shitty transit is doing something shitty to that person, and then they're shitting on me. Mm-hmm. And now there's shit everywhere. But also, it's the transit. It's not that they're a bad person necessarily. And it's not that, you know, I did something wrong necessarily. It's here's the energy. So how am I going to respond with that energy? And again, like back to the emotional intelligence thing, I think that in life, it is very tempting to react and react and react. And what I think astrology is a great tool for is, you know, you're still going to live your life and react, but then to like take a beat and think about whatever's happening and then choose how you respond. And that makes life a lot more effective. And in the context of social issues, I mean, I have so much to say, and I don't want to totally derail the conversation from relationships and stuff like that. But this is not meant to be a time astrologically where we are comfortable. We're meant to dismantle the very systems that are within our society that are putrid, that are rotten. And we all are implicated in it in different positions, but we're all implicated. And so understanding that astrology is not making that, astrology is articulating that, and giving us tools to figure out how that kind of engages with what we are and what we're capable of. I also think that if, you know, some people are really anxious and they can't handle any kind of prediction that's negative, don't fuck with astrology. There's other things out there. Like, obviously, like, I'm obsessed with astrology and I want everyone to listen to my podcast and read my book and all the things, but it's not all things are for all people at all times. And if your stress level's too high, don't fuck with it, you know, develop other tools and then come back to it when you can make use of it. And I think that that's an important thing. Like, we don't need to be monogamous to astrology. You know, we can just like fuck around, see how it works, walk away, come back. And I think that it's important to be willing to do that because these times are really trying, and we need to keep on checking with ourselves and pivoting, you know? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I fully answered that question, but that's.
Yeah, that was helpful. Yeah. Kind of piggybacking off of that, like, how can people, well, so I guess I'll put it this way. I've had at least a lot of newer clients who have been into astrology for a while, but like, because of quarantine, because of a lot of extra time on their hands to be able to focus on something, have been like really getting into astrology. And I love it. It's so great to see, and it's really exciting. People come to readings with a lot of questions, and I love that. But I wanted to know if you have advice from people who are starting to use astrology more and more in their lives, and are also navigating their lives and relationships during this time, especially in quarantine. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I think that, you know, when you're learning astrology, you can kind of become like, whoa, this tool is so amazing, and you want to try it out on everyone. And I think that sometimes we can become overzealous and use it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm thinking of people who are like in quarantine with loved ones, or not in quarantine with loved ones, but like talking to people like on Tinder or something, and you know, using astrology. And do you know what I'm saying?
I totally know what you're saying. Basically, okay, because I also see this with the questions I get for the podcast. I'll say a couple things. The first thing is, what I've noticed with the questions I get from my podcast is people are like, So I keep on having this relationship pattern, you know, and it's XYZ. And I think it's related to my mom because my mom was XYZ. And I'm sure it comes from Chiron square to my South Node. And I'm like, where did you come up with that? So the thing is, when you start studying astrology and using astrology, you kind of got to think like a journalist. You can't go in with a foregone conclusion and be like, I'm fucked up in this way. Where much art can I find it? That's not using astrology properly. And this is the downside of how accessible astrology is right now. And before I say the downside, I want to say I'm so fucking glad that astrology is so accessible. Like, but there's, you know, nothing's perfect. Is that just reams of people have access to a blog post on fucking everything, and they don't have any foundation. So the problem is you can't really make use of the data if you don't actually have the data. So, you know, I mean, it's like, it's just a learning process. And so I think that brings me to another part of my answer to this question of like, if you're actually going to study and you're going to try to like read for people, get a beginning book. Like, I actually am a huge fan of The Only Way to Learn Astrology series by March and McEvers. Did you ever see that book?
I think so. I've definitely seen it in the store or something.
It's one of those, it's from the 80s. March and McEvers were actually like a big part of the astrology world. They've both crossed over now. But it's a series, and it literally is a workbook. You know, it's just an old school workbook.
About it before.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with it because the first astrology class I took in 1992, I think it was, you know, before computers. Like, nobody had a computer. We had to learn how to do the astrology by hand. I mean, computers existed, but it's not like, I don't know who had one.
I mean, the internet like was born at that point, so
it was born, but I sure as hell didn't have a fucking computer. Anyways, the moral of the story is, so what I learned when I learned on that book. So I took a class with a professor in alternative college I went to in Montreal, where I'm from, but he had us get this book, and, you know, we'd fill it out. And in 1992, all the references were so dated. I was like, I don't know who these people are. Like, I don't know why you're telling me about, anyways. So it's just like, if you get the books, you'll be like, where did she point me? But it teaches the basics. It teaches the glyphs. It teaches the planets and rulerships and like elements and qualities and keywords. And it gives you the foundations to be able to then look at a blog post and be like, this is not actually good, or this is great. I'm going to add this to my studies, because there's no metrics, you know, with astrology. There's just all this data out there, and it's hard for you to know whether you're reading good data or bad data, right? Plus, there's different ways of using astrology. And so, you know, some of my friends who are great astrologers who, you know, use astrology really competently, they don't fuck with outer planets. It's the centerpiece of my practice. And they're not wrong, and I'm not wrong. It's just different uses. People are always like, why don't you use Vesta? And I'm like, because I don't. There's so many things I don't use. Do you want me to bring out the scroll? Like, we can't. And that's like, it's just, I think that people want to jump to the like gooey part in the center because it's the most delicious part. And I cannot blame a person. And if I had the access to the internet that people have now, I would have done the same thing, I'm sure. But it's not how you learn, and it doesn't make what you're saying to the people in your life reliable. And that's what gets them to roll their eyes at you and be like, astrology's dumb, you know? So if you care about astrology, my advice is to just like treat it right, give her respect.
Yeah. And that probably, like, would you also suggest, you know, just, I would say, get a reading with an astrologer to help you make sense of all the information that you're taking in. Like, there's so many astrologers out there, and who have, you know, price points from maybe even like $50 for an hour to hundreds of dollars for an hour, but there's someone out there that can help you.
Yes.
All this.
And I would even add to that, like, over the course of years, get multiple readings from multiple different kinds of astrologers, because it shows you how people run their practice, how people work with, you know, the same data, because we all have, you know, our own unique ways. And then, you know, if you can afford a class, if you have the kind of brain where you like classes, there's hella classes out there. And I would even add to that, post-COVID times, or maybe even during COVID times on Zoom and stuff like that, astrology groups are the best. I mean, it's where we met IRL. The first time was at Norwalk, right?
Yeah, no, we met after the Vice conference.
Brooklyn.
in New York
Was that
City.
before?
Yeah.
That was before.
That
You're
was
right. You're
before,
right.
Yeah.
But again, another astrology conference situation. And I, you know, when I moved to San Francisco in 1994, I became part of the San Francisco Astrological Society. And then eventually East Bay Astrological Society. And it was like, you know, it was people who were like 20, 30, 40 years older than me. It was like, it wasn't my demographic, but I learned so much from being around practitioners who had dedicated their like hearts and like time to astrology. And there's nothing like it. There's just nothing like it. And that's part of why the podcast for me works, because it's a way of like sharing, you know. And I would say one of the most instructive teachers I ever met was a woman who I never learned her name. I met her once. She said two things to me that have shaped my practice. And like when she drove me home from an event once, like there's just like the magic that happens in alchemy of being around people, and astrologers and astrology can get you two in your head. Don't forget that the use of astrology, if you're using it to like read your friends and loved ones and your enemies and your exes, is about people. So don't forget the people part. That's I think very good advice I've just given.
I love that.
Thank
you. Okay, more advice. All the rest of the questions are advice.
Great, good. I love advice.
So, you know, we're in this time period right now, and we had a little glimpse into Saturn in Aquarius this spring. And so Saturn's back in Capricorn right now. People are finishing up their Saturn returns and also preparing for Saturn returns. So Saturn and Capricorn people almost out of the woods come December, and then Saturn and Aquarius people begin that journey. Words of advice for us as Saturnian returners.
Yes.
Would love, from the Saturn Queen.
Thank you very much. The Saturn and Capricorn and Saturn and Aquarius journey is a very different journey. And the Saturn and Cap people, I'll just start there because TikTok, you got 5 more minutes and that's it. Nobody envies late degree Saturn and Capricorn people in 2020. Are you one of those people?
No, I'm 1 degree Aquarius.
So. Oh shit. Oh, well, you're practically.
I've had my Saturn return twice already. So.
Yeah. You got one more big hit or 2 more hits.
One more hit.
One more hit.
In January. Yeah.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
It's a big time. I mean, to be Saturn returning during the social uprising that we're in, to be Saturn returning during fucking global pandemic, and all the crazy shit that's happening politically and socially, and the kind of internal transformations that we're all kind of going through, means coming of age and coming into the kind of maturity of mastering how you are meant to be a part of society during this shit. I mean, no big deal, no big responsibility. I mean, my God. So the Saturn and Cap people, I think the advice I would give in this final pass of your Saturn times is be gentle with yourself. When you seek to advance your humanity and you compromise your humanity and how you handle yourself, you're fucked. And the reality is Saturn return Capricorn people, the people who are at the late degrees of Cap, you're dealing with fucking Mars. You're dealing with Mars being like, fuck you to Saturn. And that Saturn-Mars square, oh God. Yeah. And your Saturn is so close to Pluto. And so you're dealing potentially with a Saturn-Pluto issue. I mean, there's just so much pressure. And so the key is, you know, you don't need to prove yourself and you don't need to be perfect. It's about acting in integrity. Saturn in Capricorn is like, I think of Saturn in Capricorn as so much about like being a conservationist, not a conservative, a conservationist, learning how to conserve your energy, to conserve the shit that comes out of your mouth, to conserve what you give to people, to be a conservationist and how you approach self-care and your life in general, the world in general. I think that is probably the most sustainable approach given the mishigas of the world. Now, Saturn in Aquarius is a slightly different story because Saturn in Aquarius, I want to say these, but you people, and I do think it's incredibly different. Somebody who's in the first 6 degrees of Aquarius versus somebody who's in their, the 20 degrees, because you're already like almost done. And some people haven't even started properly feeling their Saturn return yet. So we are talking about kind of like a wide range of people. So Saturn in Aquarius for the first, let's say 10 degrees of Aquarius. I would say for this demographic of people, the key is to really know that what you do fucking matters. What you do counts. Sorry, no pressure. No pressure at all. Sorry.
Cool, it's fine.
Yeah, no big deal, right? But what you do really matters, because what you're doing is you're coming of age in this, which I see the Sun return as a coming of age. You're coming of age in this moment of revolution. And so you are the youngest adults in that revolution, because from my perspective, the Saturn return is when we become an adult. It's really like the adult line, you know, for better or worse. And so, you know, being the youngest adults in a revolution is a fertile and powerful thing. And making sure that you don't abandon yourself through that process is essential, because the problem with Saturn and Aquarius is you can get in your head about it and be like, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And then it goes into paralysis. There's no action at all, or inertia or whatever. And so there is a way that that first 10 degrees, I feel like there's all this extra pressure on your generation to figure it out and do it, like figure it out and do it now. In terms of like a little bit later in the Saturn and Aquarius, honestly, part of me wants to say, like, let's talk about this after the election. What are the conditions we're dealing with? Because, you know, I am obsessed with the themes of Saturn and Aquarius and what happens historically when Saturn is in the sign of Aquarius. And it is always a time for upheaval and revolution and power being brought back to the people by the people. And is it the people who are in their Saturn return who are responsible for that? No, not alone, but you are a massive part of it. And so the thing I would say for somebody who's, you know, after that 10th degree of Aquarius is it's okay to give yourself a minute here. Give yourself a year, 2020, 2021, to really determine for yourself, who do you want to be in this? Because you got to, I mean, you're here to be somebody in it, you know? And so many people have asked me the question, shit, this is my Saturn return. What am I supposed to do? And it's like, this is your Saturn return. Only you can determine what you're supposed to do. The Saturn return is one of the few times where we can seek models of behavior, we can seek mentorship, but only if it facilitates our embodiment of our adulthood. It's a real fucking pain in the ass. That's why people don't like it, because it's very difficult. And it comes with all this pressure, that Saturnine pressure of like, Saturn is related to mastery, but the level of mastery that we can achieve at the Saturn return is frustrating, because now you're mature enough and old enough to know what you haven't yet done. It's really fucking annoying, because when you're in your 20s, you can be like, yeah, I got this, I'm fine. And then you hit your fucking Saturn return, you're like, damn, there's so much more. And it's frustrating. And even if you are like a 22-year-old who has that sense of like, there's so much more I could do, it gets more intense, as you know now, in the Saturn return. And I would say one more word about that. I hope I'm not over talking about the Saturn return, but I'm obsessed with it. Is that this is not your only Saturn return. You know, there'll be another one. And if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on your thoughts on things, there'll be a couple more, you know? And so I think that part of what's really important about understanding the Saturn return is understanding it is a meaningful point in a cycle of your mortality, and not in a like, oh shit, I'm going to die or I'm going to get old way, but in a, I've got this run, you know, I've got this run here in this fucking meat suit. What am I going to do with it? Like, this meat suit is on a marble. What am I going to do with that? You know? And I think for me, that is a really exciting time to embrace astrology, because astrology points us towards and away from things, which is kind of convenient and helpful. I don't know how people live without astrology, honestly.
I feel the same way.
Right?
Like, we have this tool. It's like the best tool that we could use.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally
Agree button. Yeah.
So yeah, Saturn is entering Aquarius, I believe December like 17th.
17th. Yeah.
And then Jupiter will follow, and then they'll meet up on December 21st, which is also the solstice, which there's also like a Mercury Cazimi. I don't know why everything has to pile on in the same days all the time, but so yeah, we're working with that. And then we also have Uranus and Taurus. And so all of 2021, really, we're working with this square between Saturn and Uranus in Taurus, in Aquarius, lots of tension within fixed signs.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know if you had any words of wisdom for people who might have fixed placements, meaning planets in Taurus or Leo or Scorpio or Aquarius. And I'm talking about them specifically because fixed placements are kind of notorious for not really loving change, especially when it's sudden and unexpected. And then, you know, definitely want to talk about people who have like personal planets and points, like especially if you have a fixed rising sign, things like that, because you will be dealing with this pretty head on. But then also if you maybe could speak even generationally, because like Pluto and Scorpio are having the opposition from Uranus. Then there's like Pluto and Neptune, Uranus and Neptune. Oh, God. Uranus and Scorpio, Neptune and Scorpio. Sorry, mixing up my words. Mercury and Sag. So yeah, how can people like kind of work with this energy of, you know, all this kind of upheaval having in these areas of life that tend to be more stable?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple bits of advice I'll give. One is an astrologer told me this years and years ago, and I don't remember who it was. It may have been Lene Van Horn, but when you have a square in your chart between, let's say, Saturn and Uranus, just to use your example, or you're going through a transit that is really challenging for you, seek out a person who, instead of has your Saturn Uranus square, has those two planets trine. Because it's the same energy, but you get to see how it flows. Because astrology's energy, and the energy running through our lives is energy that can be manipulated. It can be engaged with. And so what I would say is, if you are a fixed person, like if you got hella fixed things in your chart, or just important fixed things in your chart, or you're getting major transits that are just like, I'm getting blocked in all ways, they don't call it fixed for nothing, then if you can find people to talk to, or people in your life that don't have that same transit or that same aspect, because then you can see that energy model differently, and it will give you insight into how you're engaging with the energy itself. So it's like more of an astrology student or astrologer's trick. But then, you know, because of course I've been thinking about this. I've been like, okay, how are we going to damn do a thing? Especially because with Mars square to Saturn this week, yeah, it's not the same energy. You know, we're talking about cardinal energy and Mars and Saturn, but yeah, it's also kind of fucking similar. It's just like, mm-hmm. When we feel blocked or bullied by our circumstances, the key is to be inquisitive, you know, it's to be interested. And the thing about fixed placements is when we have them, we're not that interested because we already fucking know the answer, you know? I mean, I know, I certainly have fixed placements. You know, it's like, I don't need to investigate that. I already know. Yeah. But this is going to be the time for investigating fucking everything. And it's exhausting. And so in regards to that, this is where something that I have great concerns about, and it's complicated, and I don't think it's like, you know, it's not a simple topic, so I shouldn't be bringing it up at this point in the conversation, but here I go. But this is where call-out culture is going to be a real problem, because the problem with the culture of calling each other out as individuals, so I don't mean like in a systemic way, there's a lot of ways that call-out culture is very helpful and healthy, but in the way that it isn't, all this fixed shit that we have coming is going to, unfortunately, I think, trigger, if the way that we handle other people making mistakes or doing something wrong is by blaming them and condemning them, then when we inevitably fuck up, we will either turn into total narcissists and hold ourselves by a totally different standard, or we will then harm ourselves. And so, you know, to me, the big picture of all of this stuff, it's happening certainly in the US under the backdrop of great upheaval. And so the more inquisitive we can be, the more interested we can be in our own responses, our own reactions, and less fixated on what other people are or aren't doing, the more agency we'll have. And fixed signs need agency. I mean, we all need agency, but don't take agency from a fucking Scorpio, Aquarius, Leo, or Taurus. It's just a fool's errand. So that's like my quick answer to that. I don't know if it's actually super instructive, but it's what I've been thinking about.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful. Yeah, thinking about remaining inquisitive and all of that as a fixed sign with fixed placements, that is helpful.
It's just not easy though, because it's not organic. But the thing about, like, you know, because you're Scorpio sun.
And Mars and Pluto all conjunct.
Hey, that's bananas. What house, do you mind if I ask?
Ninth house.
Oh, okay. That's good. It's nice and mutable house.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think with something like that, it's about, you know, being inquisitive in the way, in the energetic way of your own nature. So for somebody like you who has that much Scorpio, and it's not just Scorpio, it's fucking Pluto, right? Sun, Mars, Pluto. Wow. Right. So it's about being inquisitive, but in a secretive, deep, personal, emotional way. It's not about being analytically inquisitive necessarily, because that's not the energetics of Scorpio. An Aquarius person might be more like, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know why I use nerd voice for Aquarius. I have hello Aquarius in me, but whatever. I did it. So I think that the key is to and this is again where we come back to like the earlier part of our conversation. It's understanding the nature of our own energetic composition, so that we can work with that to the best of our ability in like a windstorm with a fire-nado, and like your internet's out and your cat's meowing at you. Like, you know what I mean? Like everything is happening at once. And so we just can't lose track of ourselves and our humanity within that. And, you know, you named so many important things that are coming, but there are more than the things you named, as you know, and including the Pluto return. And so for those of us in the US, all of our personal shit is happening with great upheaval yet to come. So I think that within all of this stuff, it's important, you know, this is something I say all the time on my podcast, but I feel like I always have to say it. It's important that we recognize that no one is exempt. No one's exempt. Everyone is going through this. It's painful. It's terrible. There's a lot of grief, you know, in this. There's a lot of pain, and the work is to stay with it and cultivate the skills to stay with it, because that's what gets us out of this and into something better, instead of more band-aids on bullet wounds. You know what I mean? It's a shitty metaphor. I shouldn't have used that terrible expression, but I did, and that's what happened. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I think to kind of piggyback on that and ask one last question before we get to the Q&A, I think a lot of people are thinking, like, witnessing what's happening right now and also learning astrology and thinking like, what's my place in all of this, and how can I be of service, and like what are my gifts, and I guess like in a very general sense, like what should people look at in their own charts to kind of get a sense of how they can be a part of, you know, this revolution and this the change that's happening right now.
Okay, watch me be a real serious fucking 40, almost 46-year-old Capricorn right now, okay? Watch it happen. Don't use astrology that way exactly, because I get tons of questions for the podcast about that. And my attitude is, this is not the time to be special. This is the time to fall in line, to fucking do the mundane work of activism, to call representatives, to make some noise, to hit the streets. There's so many ways to be a part of the solutions we seek and we need. You can do it within the system. You can do it outside of the system. So find your ways based on your ethics, your resources, your conditions, your beliefs, but find a fucking way. Don't find it through astrology. You're special. I'm special. Everyone's special. We're astrologers. Of course we know everyone's special. But also, this is the time to find social leaders, political leaders, activists that you believe in. Do what the fuck they are clearly putting out. Don't contact them directly and be like, hey, I really respect your work. Can you tell me what to do so I don't feel guilty or whatever? Like, don't do that shit, right? But instead, you know, there's so many resources out there. Sign up for any of the millions of resources and do actions. Do actions. This is the time to be actively engaged. Love and light is beautiful. Love, 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 light. It's not enough. It's love, light, action. You know, so that's my answer about that. This is not the time to like seek your special place in the revolution. Just fucking take a place, do the dirty work, get it done so that we can move shit along, because this is emergency bells, sirens, go time. There was a fire NATO in the Bay Area, multiple fire. What the fuck is a fire NATO? Every time you think, how am I special? How should I participate? Think fire NATO, jump out and do a damn thing. That's my answer.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Not very astrological, but I strongly believe in it.
No, I mean, it's what we need to hear.
I think so.
Are you ready to take some questions?
I love questions. Yes.
So I will start reading them. So Sheila Chung Hagen asks, can you share with us one or two of your favorite examples of how someone learning about the relationship astrology shifted their perspective or approach to challenge? Sorry, let me read that again. Can you share one or two of your favorite examples of how someone learning about their astrology, I guess in the context of relationships, shifted their perspective or approach to a challenge in the relationship?
Do you want to answer that? Should I answer how we do a thing?
I'm thinking, yeah, you answer it because
okay.
Yeah, you answer it first.
Okay. Yeah, if something comes up, you do too. Okay. I would say the most common thing that I see or I've seen in my client work is people come in and they're like, my boyfriend's this, he said that, he was born here. What should I do? Or, what does it mean? And I'm always like, my attitude is always, let's put away the boyfriends. Let's put away the boyfriends. Let's focus on you. Your chart gives you all the answers you need. That's what I believe as an astrologer. It is a rare thing that we need to look at your partner's chart to figure out what is healthy and appropriate for you. The way to be in relationships is about being self-referential, being healthy, taking responsibility. And the reason why we don't do that is either because we don't know how, or because if we do that, we lose our relationships because they're not good for us. And I will say that for me is the most common thing. The other thing I can say, someone learning astrology, I guess the only other thing I could say in response to that question is the more you learn about yourself, the more you accept yourself, the more you say, oh shit, I've got like 3 planets in Scorpio. I need time alone to parse out my feelings before I can tell a person how I feel. You can cross me 3 times. The 4th time, I'll burn down your house and walk away. Like whatever, right? Like it's good to like know. I didn't literally mean that about you. Sorry.
No,
okay, sorry.
I didn't even make the connection.
Okay, cool. I was just like running off of your example. But yeah, to be able to like see like these aren't my math. And therefore it's my nature. It gets easier to accept yourself. It gets easier to then make healthy choices and recognize when you're not in the right relationship or you need to like change the relationship to make it right. So that's my quick take.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like exactly what you said, learning about yourself gives you the tools to kind of figure out, how to even approach relationships. And also there's that self-acceptance piece to it. Something that's come up a lot for me and my clients lately is this concept of pleasure and joy and being able to create that for oneself. And I found that a lot of people aren't very in tune with that and have a hard time figuring out how to create love and joy and pleasure, 5th house things, Venusian things, for themselves, and are oftentimes relying on people to kind of bring that into their lives. And so, yeah, I don't know, that's something that's come up a lot for me and my clients, and that we really focus on like, how can you strengthen your 5th house? How can you work with your 5th house so that you're generating, things that you love, you're turning yourself on, basically, and not necessarily putting that on someone else to do for you. Yeah. So that's been something that's come up a lot for me and clients. I think that might be because I'm having some 5th house stuff with.
So you're like pulling clients in that do that. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. I mean, I will also just say, not to overdo this one question, because I know we have a bunch to answer, but I will say, just as a like fun cheat, for people who are like, just give us something more astrological that I can run with. Uranus, non-monogamy. Saturn, monogamy. Neptune, polyamory. And Pluto, just about anything. You know what I mean? Could go in any direction. Jupiter loves to cheat. So if we're looking for like a little bit of like actual astrology data that you can run to your birth chart and study and obsess on, these are like vast, you know, these are like gross generalizations, but they're fun ones to know about. So yeah.
Yes, look at where Uranus is showing up in your chart, Neptune, all of those. I guess we'll leave it with that. Another question is from Dude for Real 25. I love reading these. I love reading tree names. I'm like, back in the 90s, or no, that's not true. I was a baby in the 90s. Back in the early 2000s. Do you have any tips for finding an astrologer to read your chart? I've had a hard time letting people read me. They have a Scorpio stellium, and I'm working on learning astrology, but want more guidance.
Such a good question. I get emailed this question multiple times a week, every week. And it's tricky, you know, because somebody who's my favorite astrologer to read me, you might not have a great experience with them for any number of reasons. And I think it's really smart to be very propitious with your birth chart. Maybe that's the wrong word, but whether you have a Scorpio stellium or not, like I don't just show my chart to anyone. I don't think that's a smart move, generally speaking. You know, that's a tricky question because there's so many people. You can, if you want somebody who's younger, you should go on social or read their horoscopes, because there's so many younger astrologers, probably my age, but mainly younger, like younger than 40. If you want somebody who's like in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, who's been 70s, who's been doing it for like 30, 40, whatever years, then go to the astrology conferences, like Google them, NORWAC, OPA, IZAR, I'm missing a big one. NCGR is an organization. Most cities have organizations, and look at the speakers in past conferences, and you can cheaply usually buy one of their talks and see if you resonate with the way their work goes. So with older astrologers, that's the way to do it. And with younger astrologers, there's generally like, they have a TikTok and you can like learn from them that way or whatever. And then of course there's a smaller group of podcasting astrologers. But I do think it's wise to vet and source, because getting a reading is intimate and getting a bad reading is traumatic. I have unfortunately had a bad reading in recent years, and it was really bad. It was like harmful. So I was really surprised by that. So I'm glad you're being careful. You know, that's my answer. I don't know if you have a different answer.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think my answer would be, you know, consume some content. And, you know, there's a lot of astrology podcasts out there who are interviewing other astrologers and other people out there. And so kind of just getting a feel for people. I mean, Twitter is like, that's like my social media of choice. That's because that's where all the astrologers are. The astrologers are on Instagram, but in terms of people having conversations and really engaging and speaking the language with one another, that happens a lot on Twitter. And so I would say like join Astro Twitter. And even if you want to just lurk around, but see how people are talking about astrology, check them out. And yeah, I mean, a lot of times people have webinars. You can buy like $20, $30 webinars and just check out people's approaches. And I think you'll know when someone resonates with you, when you hear them talking about astrology and about life, and it feels aligned with you, and you want to hear what they would say about you and your chart. That's kind of when you know you're ready to kind of take the dive. But I think it's smart to be a little discerning about who you let see your chart. I'm Pisces rising. I have Jupiter on the descendant. I have no boundary. So everyone knows my chart. I talk about my chart all the time, even though I do have that Scorpio stuff. But I don't know. I don't think it's like a bad thing or weird to be discerning about it. I think it's a good thing. So yeah, I would say podcasts are like probably, I would say my number one suggestion, because you can listen to astrologers talk about astrology and really get a sense of their point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. The only downside about it is it's all younger people. So it's like, if you want an older person with more experience, you got to go to those conferences because that's where they are. They're not on social. They're not making podcasts as much. Some are.
Things like the astrology podcasts, like Chris Brennan has interviewed a lot of older astrologers on purpose.
Yeah. And there's Anne Ortley's podcast and Astrology Hub. There's a couple of them. So I just think it's good to like get across the spectrum and see where you resonate, because this person didn't say how old they were too. So that's just the move. But the bottom line is, as you said, consume content, and then it's not going to be complicated. You know what I mean? You'll just be like, yeah, I want that reading, or no, not for me.
Not for me, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's see. So apparently multiple people would like to know, how do we use astrology to stop repeating relationship patterns? For example, attracting/picking toxic and abusive men, ! But I would say that goes beyond just men. Anyone can be toxic and abusive.
Yeah. Well, there's, actually this came up recently in a conversation I was having with somebody. The reality is that now that there's more kind of conversation about toxic masculinity, and it's kind of more pervasive, and now everyone has pocket computers and everyone's living online, it makes our personal dynamics so much more clear to us in that regard, especially, if you're dating, kind of like dealing with like toxic men or toxic masculinity. And I think it makes it kind of harder to get out of now, like out of the awareness of that, but that awareness doesn't drop into emotional awareness and change until you use astrology or psychology or something. For me, it's really about recognizing, for me, the way I look at it astrologically is I'm going to look at the outer planets and what they're doing to your inner planets or your angles. That's the place to start. If you just want to like zone in and look for your trauma, which is kind of a not super great way of using astrology, and I don't necessarily recommend it, see an astrologer. But if you're like, I don't have money, or I know everything and I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want, then what I recommend you do is look at the hard aspects, anything from the conjunctions, the oppositions, the squares, between outer planets and inner planets. And those will describe the kind of driving compulsions that are having you align yourself with or resonate with people who keep on bringing you what you don't want. Because ultimately, we need to change what we resonate with and what we're willing to consent to on some level in order to attract something new. And I want to be really clear, that doesn't mean that I'm like blaming people for attracting terrible people. When people treat you wrong, when people treat you like shit, when people do wrong, that's on them. It's never on you. But at the same time, what astrology does is it shows us what kind of terrible people, what kind of abuse we resonate with. And the more kind of self-aware we get, we can heal it. And then the last thing I'll say about that before I let you take it is, this is where we want to be patient, because astrology explaining things to us, I've been a practicing astrologer since I was like 19 or 20. I started young. I've been obsessed with astrology for a million years. And it doesn't mean that my healing was fast-tracked. It just meant that the whole time I was making terrible mistakes, I knew what I was doing and I wasn't stopping it. You know what I mean? Just because you know the end of the story doesn't mean you don't go through all the emotions, Yeah. So this is where it's like, it's not going to save you. Astrology is not going to fix you. Astrology is going to maybe point you in the right direction and be like, use this instead of that. But it's not going to do the work. You're going to do the work or not. Mm-hmm. So that's my hot take.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I so relate to like seeing the pattern, being an astrologer, seeing the pattern very much clearly laid out in front of you, but having a hard time breaking the cycles. For me, when someone talks about like patterning, the whole chart is kind of like your code. That's like the code that you operate on. But my approach will tend to be looking at the nodes. I'm looking at your north node and your south node, and in particular, if there's planets squaring those nodes or on the south node or north node, and transits to the nodes being opportunities to kind of tap into that patterning and make some sort of change to it. I think looking at your nodal axis and really digging into that is, I think, a really good place to go in terms of just wanting to understand your patterning in general, which will often show up in relationships. Like my nodes are in the 11th house and the 5th house, but it's every single time I've had a nodal return, nodal reversal, that's when I'm in the most important relationships of my life. And it shows, yeah, that tends to show up for me, at least, and my clients. So I would say look into your nodes, and that will give you a really intimate understanding of your patterning and the ways that things are constantly sort of like playing out for you. And that'll give you kind of clues as to things you can do to shift. I hope that's helpful. All right, Sheila asks, you talked about being a medium, and I assume that it can take a toll on you energetically. What advice do you have for energetically sensitive people to release intense energies that come their way?
That is very real, and it's a constant process. And there's so many different things I do every day to clear energy and shield. And I think that, you know, for energetically sensitive people, just like every other demographic, it's like we're not a monolith. The ways that we are porous is somewhat individual. And, you know, of course, there's general things. But I think a really important thing, and it's something I have a Patreon page, and I just started this month dropping some content around energy work, like walking people through energy work. It's still something I'm really kind of finding my way with, how to express with words. But the key is, first of all, get into your body. You are safe in your body in a way, even if your body has pain or grief and all this, because what happens when we're energetically sensitive is we tend to like bounce out of our bodies. And when we do that, shit comes in and we don't know what it was because we weren't at the door, like we weren't at the door to let it in. And so making a practice of getting in, and then to, and this might be too woo or not woo enough, nobody knows. But I think the key is to expand your aura, to really work with your auric field and make it big and be in the bigness of your aura, because you're actually safer in the bigness of your aura. You're actually more protected, even if you're scared of being seen. If you're trying to be in the brightness and the bigness of your aura, but you're in an environment that you don't feel physically safe or you don't feel energetically safe, you can hide your little energetic body in the sun. So you're in the brightness of light, but you're not going to outshine the fucking sun. I don't care who you are. You're not outshining the sun. So then you can kind of be in your bigness, but also be obscured and hidden, you know, at the same time. I mean, I have a lot of things I do, and I don't want to like use up all our time on it, but the final thing I'll say in terms of releasing, a simple, very affordable thing, Epsom salt baths. You know, Epsom salts are really good for pulling impurities out of the body. I actually dropped an episode, it was maybe a month or two ago, where there's a prescription bath in it from somebody who prescribes spiritual baths for releasing energy. So you might want to like peek around for that episode, and that way you can get that, or maybe contact them and see if they can help you with creating more of those rituals if they resonate for you.
Yeah, I love that. I'm not a medium, but I'm extremely sensitive.
I would imagine.
And, I've taken psychic development classes and I get this question a lot because I also get a lot of super sensitive clients who are often just overwhelmed by all the things, and I totally relate to that. And something that I think is just available for almost anyone is picturing your auric field and picturing yourself just surrounded by white light. That's like a very, very basic technique, is like surround yourself with some sort of comforting light. And it's just like a process of imagining it's there, and just like kind of working on that sort of picturing it in your head sort of thing, in your mind's eye. It helps me a lot to just like surround myself, picture my aura, filling it up with like some nice warm white light, or pink light or whatever it is. And then also you can picture like sort of like a barrier around your aura. You can do it with like metallic, or even like just like a thick, dark shield. Sometimes I like to think of like, if I would need to be invisible, just think about an invisibility cloak just dropping from the sky. And
Harry Potter styles.
Yes, exactly.
I know, I heard it. I saw it when you did it. I would also add to that. That's really good. I have also done that. You can throw a neutralizer all around your auric field. So just set a neutralizer so that basically what it does is it neutralizes any energies that come through that like make it past your boundaries. Because I also work with kind of, I think of it as like mirrors, like you see on windows of cars, right? But and that's great for narcissists because they just bounce off. But a neutralizer is really helpful, especially for like if you're sensitive to like the morphic field of fear, you know, then a neutralizer is really great. And being invisible doesn't help as much, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
Although I love to work with an invisibility cloak.
I love invisibility.
Yes.
I mean, that's
Sure.
like my Scorpio-ness coming through maybe. Like sometimes I just don't want to be seen, and it really helps.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would say is grounding through nature, and just like getting yourself outside, putting your feet on the ground, touching trees, touching the ground, just anything that where you can kind of envision any sort of energies that you don't want around you, kind of moving through you and out of you, and giving it back to the earth, because the earth knows what to do with it. That's something that's really helpful. And also showering, like just when you're showering or bathing, kind of picturing things washing off of you and flowing down the drain, and that can help sort of make you feel a little bit more cleansed and free of anyone's extra shit, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that's helpful. Okay, next one. Nikki asks, I'm watching this with a friend. Where might we begin looking at our chart to talk about our compatibilities?
Between you as friends, right? Like that's what the question means.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, I don't work with synastry. Synastry is when you take your chart and their chart and you kind of overlap them. And that is one way of determining compatibility or lack thereof, right? I don't find it super effective. I don't enjoy it. I work with composite charts, which is midpoint astrology, and it requires the location of the relationship. So it's a lot more specific. But it is advanced astrology. So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's useful to you for like what the two of you could do right now. If you like heart each other and you're like besties and you feel like you're siblings, look to the moon. If you are watching this with your good friend and you like just like talk all the goddamn time, look to Mercury. If you like secretly make out or you're just like snuggle friends, you're like just like tender with each other, go to Venus. And if maybe you're running a business together, look at how your Saturn fucks with each other. You know what I mean? Like each of the planets, and this is, funny you should ask, I did write a book about it. But this is where I actually think every planet and every point in the chart answers that question. I really just do. But that's like your cheat sheet quick way if you want to do it. That's what I would say. But compatibility is actually really complicated. And for like horoscopes and like quick conversations, we like as astrologers to make it easy because people want it to be easy. So we try to like give you answers, but compatibility is so complicated because people are complicated and relationships are complicated. So sorry.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, I would also agree to look at the moon, because the moon shows like your level, what you need to feel comfortable and safe in any situation. And I think looking at if your moons are compatible or if their sun is compatible with your moon or vice versa. One of my best friends and I have that, and we just adore each other. Like Scorpio sun, they have a Scorpio moon. I have an Aries moon, they have an Aries sun. So we have this like, it's so comfortable, you know what I mean? And so things like that, looking at that, and that would be synastry, like Jessica was saying, looking at like, if maybe your moon is in the same sign as their Venus, like there's going to be some sort of level of comfort or familiarity there. So kind of looking at, that's like I think a very basic way of doing it. Just look at where your planets are, where their planets are, and kind of seeing where they match up. and like reading, you know, if you're looking at a website, and you're reading a delineation, kind of like, oh, do you think this is true about me? And, you know, kind of maybe reading it to each other, like, I love this about you, things like that. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little too cutesy with it.
No, I mean, it's cute. It's cute. I mean, it sounds like it's like an evening out. Let's do a thing.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I'm just like, I would love to be sitting here with my like best friend talking about our charts, because that's kind of all I do anyway. But yeah, so hopefully that's helpful. And also just in terms of like a resource you can use, astro.com is, I would say, like the go-to standard great resource, because you'll get accurate charts there. And I'm pretty sure they probably have some sort of compatibility feature.
They do.
You can also do composite charts on astro.com. So yeah, in terms of where to go, I would definitely start there.
Yeah.
Grace asks, which transit should we look into to find insight about handling new situations with love?
I'm not sure I understand that question. A transit won't make you handle new situations with love. Maybe you mean which aspects should we look to? Do you think that's what they meant?
I feel like, yeah, I mean, what transit should we look into to find insight? Yeah, probably they're more thinking like what aspects or what parts of their charts, maybe.
I don't know. Maybe we should skip that one because we're not really sure what they're asking. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that way as well?
I mean, I guess if I were to speak on like what transits, if I were going to take it very literally, I would say transits to your 7th house, and transits to your Venus, and transits to, if you want to go this far, the ruler of your 7th house, the planet that rules the sign on your 7th house. Any sort of transits to that planet or that 7th house is going to have to do with relationships in some way. And so that is going to give you, I'm not sure about that being about like insight, but that's going to at least like bring up things having to do with love in your relationships.
I see what the question's asking, not.
Do you get it?
They're asking about situations in your love life, not how to handle situations with love, which is how I was hearing it. Okay, no, you answered the question correctly. Sorry, so thank you for doing that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, like, you know, look at what's happening in the 7th house, and then also your 5th house too, because that's when like 5th house activations or transits tend to be when, you know, new exciting people come into your life that maybe you can explore some pleasure or romance with. So which then eventually turns into like a 7th house relationship often. So yeah, that's what I would say for that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I also think it's back to my kind of constant inquiry of what kind of relationship, when you say love, you know, a lot of people say, I want to be in love and I want to be in a relationship, but they're really coming in saying, I want a partner. And that's more of a Saturn transit, honestly. It's about like choosing someone to like link your life with. So there's so many things that can do it. And I think the better approach with astrology than looking for a transit that will bring you love, even though everything Kirah said is true and you should use that advice, but is to think about doing the work on your birth chart so that regardless if you're dealing with like a shitty transit, an easy transit, a 7th house transit or not, you kind of are like having life experiences that open you and get you ready to actually greet that person when you meet them, or those people if you fuck with multiple people at once, right? So that would be my hot take now that I understand the question.
I super agree with that. Yeah, because I mean, I think as astrologers, we get that a lot. Like, when am I going to find love? I mean, I'm constantly looking at my chart saying the same thing, so I get it. But yeah, I think, you know, it always comes down to like, okay, yeah, we can look at that. We can look at the timing of that. But like, what are you going to do in the meantime? Like, what are you doing right now to make sure that when that person does come in or people do come in, that you're ready to receive that and yeah, receive it with open arms and like be ready for that transition, because any sort of new relationship it changes some things up in your life in some way. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Grace. Okay, we have a question. so sorry. I don't think I'm gonna get through your name without totally butchering it. So I'm just gonna do the initials TS. Asks, what are some of your favorite rituals to keep you grounded during future tough transits?
I don't think it's possible to be grounded in the future. So that's really, oh yeah, I think that's like, maybe that's an annoying question, but an annoying answer, but I really just don't think it's possible to be in the future and be grounded. So what I would kind of say to that is, if you want to do a ritual to be present and grounded in the present, then you're actually making use of the transit better, because the reality is we will all go through difficult transits in life. And the more gracefully you can engage with the life circumstances, because transits are just like life experiences, right? Then the kind of better outcomes you get, right? And even if you fail or you falter or you like walk into a wall and break your nose, you learn from it if you're doing it with intention, if you're doing it from the present moment. When we live in the future, or we try to control, contain, fix the future, it actually robs us of our present. And when we rob ourselves of our present, I think that's one of the most common misuses of astrology. And I think it's also one of the most common problems of the modern world, right? So I think that the trick is to really focus on this moment, always coming back to this moment, and how are you in this moment, and how can you be responsible to this moment? Understanding that doesn't mean you won't plan for the future, but you plan for the future by grounding into here and now. That's kind of my hot take on that. Mm-hmm. It's not, but I didn't give you any rituals to stay grounded, but it could just be the wording of the question, but I don't know if it was. So yeah.
No, I think it's funny because, I mean, it shows how Saturnian you are and how Jupiterian I am. Because I feel like I use the future to stay grounded in the present moment. And that's kind of why I love predictive astrology so much, and why I use it as a timing tool primarily, I think, more than anything, is because kind of having like a glimpse, I don't want to say a glimpse into the future, but like a sort of understanding of what could come allows me to be present and in the here and now, and really focus in on what's happening so that I can sort of almost like, I don't want to say prepare necessarily, but kind of set myself in a position to receive what's coming in a more easy flowing way. So I just feel like I said like the inverse of what you said, like
the complete opposite of what I think and what I said. It's true, but that's the cool thing. Different people are different ways. And honestly, when I was your age, I would have had a different answer than the answer I have from this one, which is, I think, hopefully like a big takeaway for everyone from our whole conversation, is that our truth, especially when it comes to relationships, it's not a fixed point. It's this ever evolving thing. We are constantly growing and changing. The people in our lives and what's true for us will evolve and change if you're living right. Like if you're doing the work, you will outgrow things. You will outgrow your perspectives and your tools, and you will grow into new things and then out of them again. And like, I think that within the kind of practice of grounding, whether it's into prediction or into the moment, I think the key is to start with small things that actually you can like test. So you can like do them, sustain them over a period of time, see if they make a difference in your life. And if they do, kind of add to them. And if they don't, then change your approach. And I think that this is actually, just to kind of try to answer the question more, I think this is actually a really good time for that, because we are in Saturn and Capricorn times. We are in a lot of Capricorn energy still in 2020. And so experimenting with different ways of grounding into the moment, whatever that looks like for you, is, I think, really well starred these days, to use old school astrology talk.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, yeah, like, for example, I would say like Mars retrograde, we know it's coming. And so it's like, how can we use that knowledge of knowing Mars is going to be retrograde for 2 months in Aries, wherever that's going to be in your chart? How can we use that knowledge to ground into the present and know, okay, Mars is slowing down. Maybe that means that I can stop pushing so hard on this thing that doesn't seem to be moving forward as quickly as I might want to, and using the knowledge that we have with astrology to be, like I said, more present and respond in a way that's more in flow with everything. So yeah, I guess we'll leave you with that. Do you have any like final thoughts or things that something you would like to share?
No, I just wish I could hug everybody. I just wish that we were all like in the same room. I mean, I feel like people are probably in their PJs and like totally happy to not leave the house, but I wish we were all in the same room. And I just am so happy we got to do this together and that everyone got to come and be a part of it. So thank you so much, CIIS, for having us. This was delightful.
Yes, thank you. I'm again so happy to be here talking with you about this, and although it's not in person, I think we'll get to hug again one day, and it'll be like an extra long, extra cozy hug.
Agree.
But yeah, super happy we got to do this.
Me too.
So yeah, I guess we can invite Alex back on just in time. Hello.
I was trying to guess if it was time for me to come back. So that's perfectly timed. Well, thank you so much. It was so fun listening to this tonight, and you touched on so many things, and I feel like I need to rewatch this immediately to like revisit all of the insights. It was really fun. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening, both of you. Or yeah, I guess we're all on the West Coast, so it's all the same time. So have a great night tonight. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
Bye. And thank you to all of you who are here with us tonight for attending. We hope you will join us for some more of our upcoming talks and workshops. As a special thank you for joining us tonight, we are offering $5 off our upcoming workshop, How to Use the Enneagram for Personal Transformation with Laura Heller, which is going to be on Wednesday, November 11th. You can use the code Enneagram20 to get that discount, which we also posted in chat in case you didn't write that down really fast. This conversation was recorded tonight, so if you would like to watch it again or share it with your community, it can be found at this same link on YouTube a few minutes after this, and it will later be on our Facebook page as well. We're also going to feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and have a great evening.